Okay, so I've done one of these videos before, and I think it's a pretty nice and efficient way for me to cover a lot of films that I otherwise wouldn't probably get the chance to review, just to kind of give you guys some of my quick initial thoughts on them. I have seen quite a lot of 2019 films now, and this would just be a quick recap. I've done one of these before back in like February, and so we've got quite a few films to cover. I'm just going to talk about some of the 2019 films that I saw. And yeah, I guess we should just start with High Life by Claire Denis. So I saw this a while back, and again, all of these films you can go on my Letterboxd and read my reviews, but I saw High Life a while back, and for me it's one of the most visually impressive films this year. It's certainly one of the most visually unique. It definitely reminds me a lot of Andrei Tarkovsky's work, films like Solaris and Sacrifice. I really love the use of aspect ratio. It's kind of the pretentious aspect ratio, I guess, but it works, and I think the movie is visually very interesting. I thought Robert Pattinson was terrific, and for those of you wondering how I feel about him being cast as Batman, I absolutely love that. I'd actually say he's my first choice, just because obviously you have people like Armie Hammer and John Hamm, who I guess are more comic accurate, depictions of the character, but I think Robert Pattinson is going to bring something new and a kind of a new dynamic to the character, which is something I'm really interested to see. And for those of you who think he can't act, then you should definitely watch High Life and watch Good Time as well. So yeah, I'd say I enjoyed High Life quite a bit. I didn't love the story. A lot of it feels kind of extreme just for the sake of being extreme, and I wasn't really interested in the story at all, but the acting and then the directing I really appreciated. I also saw Drag Across Concrete. This is the new film by S. Craig Zahler, I believe is the way you say his name. I absolutely loved this one. I thought Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn were both awesome. I think Zahler is a director who he makes films that are very extreme and very violent and very kind of fucked up, but he does them in a way that feels very ambitious and very ballsy, and he's not pulling any punches, both in terms of what he's showing on screen and also in the narrative. And that's certainly something he did with Dragged Across Concrete. This film is 2 hours and 40 minutes or so. And of course you feel the runtime because it is a slow burn, but there are some really great moments. I love the cinematography as well. This is definitely also one of the best looking movies of the year, and I loved that this film, out of every single film, I would say actually made the most out of the widescreen format, because there are some shots that just feel so grand, even though it's just a bunch of guys in a standoff, and he does it in a way that feels so beautiful and so cinematic and so intense. So I really love Dragged Across Concrete. We also have Shadow by Zhang Yimou. Now this guy is one of my favorite Asian directors, and I think he's one of the best visual directors working today. And I'd probably say Shadow is like top 3 most visually stunning films of the year. There's not much of a color palette. It's mostly blacks, grays, and whites, but they do it in a way that doesn't feel dull or repetitive, and it looks absolutely incredible. The action scenes, the fight scenes are so creatively pulled off, and I just really love this film. The story, I would say, is a bit over the top. I definitely say it is kind of a rip-off of the Kurosawa film Kagemusha, and I think that movie does it slightly better, but I still really enjoyed Shadow, and it's a visual feast for sure. Another film that I saw that I really enjoyed was Fighting With My Family. Now, the overall premise of it is relatively simple, and there's not much to it, but I just love the writing. I thought Stephen Merchant's writing was really great. The acting was terrific. Florence Pugh is amazing, and I cannot wait to see her in Midsommar. We've got Jack Lowden, who gives an incredible supporting performance, and the overall message of the film is surprisingly powerful to anyone with a dream, basically, to anyone with a goal. Obviously, Stephen Merchant's directing isn't anything mind-blowing. It's pretty simple, actually. There are like 1 or 2 cool shots, but most of it's just very simple. But I have to say, I do really appreciate it for its simplicity. So yeah, really enjoyed that. I also saw Triple Frontier a while back, a couple months ago when it came out. And I feel like this is a film that most people have already forgotten about, but for me, it's really stuck with me for some reason. I mean, it's not exactly a great film or anything, but just subjectively, I really enjoyed it. And I think Triple Frontier, the best compliment that I can give it is it feels like a film that you would put on to watch in the background while working or something. and then you would stop working and just watch the whole thing because it's actually really fun. I thought the dynamic between the cast members, the characters, was really, really well done. Some of the acting is pretty solid, and the story is kind of messy, and the structure is really messy, and there are setups and payoffs that don't go anywhere or don't feel properly fulfilled. But it is a really well-directed film. I think the cinematography is awesome, the music's awesome. And yeah, I actually really enjoyed Triple Frontier. I also saw Booksmart, which a lot of people have said is like the best film of the year. And it's like super bad, but better. I disagree with both statements. I obviously love the movie. I think it's absolutely terrific. And Olivia Wilde's direction is absolutely outstanding. There's this one long take sequence, which I thought was really, really well done. And it actually looks like someone who is very seasoned directed it, not a first-time director. I thought the acting was incredible, the writing and everything, it's a lot of fun, and it's quite a funny film as well. I just feel like Booksmart isn't quite as humble or earnest as Superbad. It does feel, in a way, for some weird reason, I'm sure a lot of people disagree with me, but I felt like that movie had kind of this Hollywood sheen over it, and it tried so hard to be likable that it started to be a bit meh, whereas a film like Superbad is just there to enjoy itself. Or, like a movie like Lady Bird that, is arguably a lot more serious than Booksmart. Like that film, it also doesn't pull its punches in terms of the emotions. Whereas Booksmart just kind of feels like a slightly inaccurate depiction of high school, and that a lot of the arguments, a lot of this, a lot of that, feel either very, very over the top and generic or not dramatic enough. But I still really enjoyed it. Again, the central performances were fun, and I thought Olivia Wilde's directing was really great. So yeah, that's Booksmart. I also saw Captive State, which I think was meant to come out last year, but it came out this year, and it's a complete mess. It's not a very good film at all. One of the redeemable qualities, I think, is the acting. There are some good performances here, but they don't do much because the movie's just such a mess. The directing is alright. There's some nice moments of music, and the cinematography is nice. There's some cool shots, but most of it's just really dull and really predictable and just kind of meh. I also saw Game of Thrones The Last Watch, and I don't usually love documentaries because I either find it's just people talking about stuff with like clips of the stuff happening in front of them, and it can be very boring, or it's literally just shots of stuff with voiceover. Whereas this one was actually really fascinating. Now, I've been keeping up with the behind the scenes of Game of Thrones for a long time, basically ever since I started watching, and obviously being a filmmaker myself, I know how hard it is to pull some of the stuff they did, to pull it off. And, for example, Deborah Riley, the production designer, built a portion of King's Landing in 6 months. I mean, that's just next level. And obviously, I've been very vocal on this channel about how Game of Thrones has kind of disappointed me quite often, especially with season 8, but this video actually makes me feel bad for not liking season 8 just because of the amount of work that goes into it. I loved that they kind of highlighted, the smaller people, if you will, because we've seen a lot of Kit Harington, we've seen a lot of Emilia Clarke, and the scenes with them in this documentary are a lot of fun and are very interesting to see their reactions to the script and their reactions to their last day. But I just loved like the sandwich lady or the snow guy or Andy the extra, who I think we can all agree has a more interesting story than like the actual story of season 8. So I really, really enjoyed this, and I think it's actually quite a nice way to kind of finish off Game of Thrones. I also saw Aladdin, the Guy Ritchie Aladdin. I didn't hate it as much as I think I would. I would say it's like an average film. It's very fun, but it feels like Guy Ritchie directed a Disney film than a Disney film directed by Guy Ritchie, in the sense that it's very safe and it's very, surface level enjoyable, but it doesn't have the flair of Ritchie. And the acting is fine, I would say. Will Smith is pretty good, actually, and Naomi Scott is also good, and she sings really well and stuff, but it's just all kind of average. Like, again, the songs are fun, and the set pieces and everything are kind of competently made, but that's about it, really. It's competently made. I just thought it was fine. A big disappointment for me, however, was Godzilla King of the Monsters. Now this film was, I was really excited for it, I will say, because the trailers looked amazing, I thought, and the visuals in the trailers were incredible. And I also really liked Gareth Edwards' 2014 one. I also loved the Kong Skull Island film, which was kind of dumb fun, but it was really beautiful and well made dumb fun. Whereas this one just kind of feels like it's trapped in between the two films, like really awkwardly trapped in between the two films. Because there are some moments where it's like really grounded shots of Godzilla and the monsters, and you can't really see what's going on. And in that sense, it's very similar to the 2014 one. But then there are these stunning wide shots that look like straight up paintings, which are obviously more reminiscent of Kong Skull Island. And the film never really embraces either side, so it just feels very messy. A lot of the set pieces are very repetitive. It's like the humans are fighting an evil monster, the evil monster is about to kill the human, then Godzilla comes in, and then Godzilla gets temporarily incapacitated. And just when you think the evil monster is about to kill the humans, then Godzilla comes and saves them, and the humans get away. That is the structure for literally every single action scene. And it got really repetitive. Also, the human characters, despite the fact that they have really good actors playing them, were very dull. Obviously, I had a lot of fun watching like Charles Dance and Ken Watanabe because they have a great screen presence. But yeah, I didn't really love this film as much as I hoped I would. So the final film I want to talk about, I guess the most recent one, is Dark Phoenix. Now this was a painfully average film. I didn't hate it. I don't think I was quite as let down by this film as most people were, but because it was so average, it did feel like a letdown, because I grew up with the X-Men franchise before the MCU came out, Wolverine was my favorite superhero growing up, and I absolutely loved First Class. That film came at a time in my life where, I don't know why, I just really, really love X-Men First Class, and then Days of Future Past would go on to be really awesome, and then this film is just the most unceremonious and anticlimactic end to a pretty great franchise. And that, for me, was really disappointing. Now, there are moments in this film where you can kind of tell that people actually cared, and they wanted to make something good. But it got caught with the reshoots, and then it was too similar to Captain Marvel, and this and that, and this and that, and then Marvel, bought the X-Men franchise. And so it just got to a point where I don't think anyone cared anymore. There's like no opening title sequence. The logos for the studios literally come within milliseconds of each other, as opposed to having, like a 1 or 2 second wait like most films do. It just doesn't feel like anybody actually gave a shit in the editing room anymore. Now, this film actually has a lot of great people working on it. Now, Simon Kinberg is a first-time director, and I don't think he should have directed it, because why would you give a first-time director X-Men, the Last XMen, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Obviously, he's produced a lot of these films, but I mean, come on. And, you've got a really great cinematographer working on this film, and it looks nice. And you've got Hans Zimmer doing the music, and the music's great. And you've got Lee Smith, who's Nolan's editor, editing this film, and, it's competently put together. And I would say the first act is actually pretty good. And then the second act just kind of goes to shit. And the third act is fun, but it's some of the most rushed storytelling I've ever seen. Like, everything important happens in the last 20 minutes, basically. And then there's this train scene, which supposedly was part of the reshoot. And that scene was incredible. I thought the music was terrific in that scene. I thought the cinematography, the way they used handheld, the camera work of that scene and the editing was terrific. They used their powers in very interesting ways, especially Magneto, who I've always wanted to see kind of go all out, and I think in a way he does go all out in this train sequence. But the rest of the film is just so fucking boring and bland, and it just feels lifeless. Like, the acting is superb, but it could be better. It just feels like Simon Kinberg chose like the first take. You've got Michael Fassbender, James McAvoy, Sophie Turner, Jessica Chastain. You've got some of the best actors working in Hollywood, and you do absolutely fuck all with them. And that really pains me. Like, if I had that cast, I could make a fucking awesome film. And even if my directing was the worst part of it, I feel like I could still write a script or work with the actors in a way that would get great performances, like truly outstanding performances, and yet here it's just fine. Like, the acting is by far the best part of the film, but wow, it was quite disappointing. Dark Phoenix just feels like such a non-film. The scale is almost non-existent. It feels like a smaller movie than Logan. Yeah, it just didn't feel like a good enough finale to a pretty great franchise. So that was pretty disappointing. So that was a quick recap of some of the films I had seen recently, and I guess by recently I mean in the last couple months, that I haven't reviewed on this channel or talked about. Obviously some of them are pretty great and some of them were not so much. But I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of format of video. And I'll probably be doing a couple more of these before the end of the year. So thank you guys very, very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.